So, welcome to the afternoon sessions, and hope you enjoyed the meal. After these wonderful presentations of today's morning, we will continue now with a series of lectures concerning really thrilling topics, I think, and we're going to proceed as far as I could see to the 70s and 80s, which means to the golden age of television. And it's a pleasure to introduce Machteld Fenken. She is a historian and got her PhD at the University of Leuven. She was a member of the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute, as far as I remember, so that's another story, maybe not that happy story we would like to tell. But anyway, she is now teaching at the Institute for Eastern European Studies at Vienna University, where she's an associate assistant, I think. She's currently working on an Elise Richter Fellowship, which is a really high award, I was thinking, in Austrian, really hard to get. So she had really done hard work to get that. And now she published a monograph about Slavic migrants in Belgium during the Cold War called Straddling the Iron Curtain, Immigrants, Immigrant Organizations, War Memories. And an article I want to point out on nationalization campaigns and teachers' practices in Belgian German and Polish German border regions from 1945 to 1956. And I would like to ask you for your presentation now on the best propaganda is Adventure for Children, the non-presentation of the Holocaust in a Polish television series for Tank Man and a Dog.
Thank you very much. For Tank Man and a Dog, 4 pancerni I pies. In 1995, the biggest Polish television station organized an opinion poll, and they asked, what's the most popular Polish television series ever? And this series received the most votes. It was produced between 1965 and 1970, and already from the start it became really popular. It became a cult product, and that led to the fact that fan clubs were organized for children, and football stadiums were packed with children that could come and see their heroes. And these were very new phenomenon in communist Poland. And the series remained broadcasted continuously every year until the collapse of communism. And then it's very interesting, there was no rupture. It continued to be broadcasted afterwards. It's broadcasted nowadays in the afternoon so that children can watch it. And more lately, it also became a kind of nostalgia product for Polish adults. And so you can, there are a lot of things you can, products like DVDs for free, and you can visit a museum about it and so on. It's really a kind of topic that is still alive today in Polish society. But more, it was also the most popular cultural export product of the Polish People's Republic. It was shown all over the Soviet bloc countries, even up to Cuba. And again there, nostalgia. Nowadays, when you check the series on Wikipedia, it has a Wikipedia page which can be in different languages, mostly languages spoken in the former Soviet bloc. But don't we have a paradox here? This was a communist state television production. This was meant to spread communist propaganda. This was meant to deliberately and seriously offer a false representation of the past. And yet, it was so eagerly consumed by children and their parents. How was it possible? How was Adventure for Children, how could it be turned into the best product of propaganda of a communist state? That's my question today, and I will make my argument clear by showing on how the Holocaust and Jews were not represented in the series. I will give you some examples, and then later on I will come to a kind of analysis of it. First of all, I want to introduce you to the tankman. So the story is about 4 tankmans and a dog. It's about a tank, it's about a dog, and it's about 4 men in a tank. And who are these 4 men? It are 4 men of a Polish army. Which Polish army? A Polish army that fought together with the Soviet Red Army. It was formed in Siberia in the middle of the Second World War, and it liberated the West. So it traveled all the way up from Siberia to Poland, all the way up to Berlin in 1944 and in 1945. Now, how did this Polish army arise? Actually, at the beginning of the Second World War, a lot of Poles were deported from Poland to the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union got a part of Poland. And then, at a certain point, the Soviet Union became part of the Allies. So then, they said the Poles are not longer our prisoners, they are our friends. So they were invited to join in an army and to fight next to the Red Army together to liberate Poland again. And one always says a Polish army, but who was in there? There was citizens of the interwar Polish state, and you know that in the interwar Polish state there was a lot of linguistic, religious, and ethnic diversity, including Jews. Yes, and in the division and in this Polish army, you also had migrants who were in Siberia, were in Russia, were at some other places, and joined the army because they in some way identified with Polishness. And the good thing about the series is when they selected 4 characters for the tank, that they included some of that diversity in the characters. You have linguistic and ethnic diversity present in the tank crew, not religious diversity, because this was something that couldn't be thematized during communism. So one of the tankmen is a Pole, and his father fought in 1939 against the Germans, against the fact that Poland was defeated. And then the second Pole is one from the Polish-German borderlands, so he speaks German, and that's going to be very useful in the series. And then another Pole is like the grandson of a Pole who ended up in Siberia. One cannot say that he was deported, one just mentions he's migrated. And that's useful in the series because he speaks Russian and Polish, so he can communicate with the Red Army. And the 4th one who joins the tank crew is a Georgian, a very sympathetic Georgian. So a Georgian is a countryman of Stalin. Stalin was the one person who was not popular in Poland when the series was broadcasted. But by means of introducing this sympathetic Georgian, one could make the Soviet Union a little bit more sympathetic to Polish children by the time. Now, just to tell you how interesting this is a children's series, is that at a certain point, somebody asks in the movie, so why this Georgian is a little darker than the other ones? And then they say, his father was a Polish chimney sweeper. It so shows that by means of this kind of jokes, you could get around the difficulties of trying to steer the past into a version that could be appreciated during communism. But for children, you could explain everything. You could just make it in a fairy tale. You could just come up with explanations that you could not make for adults. Okay, I will now tell you 3 moments in the series where the Holocaust is absent. The first element is when the tank comes to Eastern Poland. So you know, in Eastern Poland there were a lot of Jews, and actually there was a lot of Holocaust. I mean, a lot of them did were victims of the Holocaust. So the way it's presented in the scene is that the tank comes into a little Polish village with Poles, and you see there even a kind of reference made to a kind of Christian blessing of an old woman of the tank, and that is how it's represented. That is how Eastern Europe, Eastern Poland looks like for the children at that moment. One speaks about the fact that that is the liberation of the Lublin lands, but one does not elaborate on that. And of course, one does not mention Majdanek or something like that, a concentration camp which was very close to Lublin. Then the second moment, like the Holocaust is completely non-represented. It's when one comes to Warsaw in 1944. If you nowadays ask any Pole to say one thing about Warsaw and the Second World War, they will come up with stories about the Warsaw Uprising in 1944, or maybe about the Jewish uprising in Warsaw in 1943. But these were elements that could not be represented during communist times. So what you see is here this Polish division coming up with the Soviet army ready to liberate Warsaw, to join the Soviet Union, and you have civilians, Polish civilians from Warsaw, who help the division to make this happen. This is a very specific communist way of representing the past, and where Jews do not play any role. And now I come to the third element, and that I will elaborate a little bit more on it, because there is one episode in the whole series that is actually concentrated on a concentration camp. It's a concentration camp of Sachsenhausen, so it's very interesting. It's a concentration camp on German soil, not on Polish soil. On Polish soil, for children, there were no concentration camps. And it's also very well picked, because Sachsenhausen was a concentration camp where there were a lot of prisoners of wars, so contrary to a lot of other concentration camps. But anyway, there were also Jews there. And I will now show you how the concentration camp is presented in the series. So the episode opens with Polish vehicles entering the concentration camp. The concentration camp is liberated. And the scene I will show you now is the little information we receive about the people inhabiting the camp. Let's see whether it works or not. Oh, there was something with left, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not on the screen.
It will be on the screen.
Okay, yeah.
Left, but unfortunately the connection is...
But I don't need sound if it doesn't work.
Well, but you need the movie, and nothing is happening at the moment.
Okay, I will just tell you. It's a really short fragment. It's about 20 seconds. There it is, and we will see whether it works. Anyway, so this is a Pole. He's one of these liberators. And then there is a bunch of Polish women coming up to him and asking something in Polish. It all goes very quickly. Then the Polish women go away. Then there is this one other prisoner who speaks French and asks, "Quelle heure est-il?" And then he goes away. And then there is another prisoner coming up, and he speaks, I think it's either German or Russian. And this is all the information you get about the inhabitants of the camp. So a lot of Polish women, a French-speaking and a German-speaking person. And then I have another fragment, and that is the only fragment in which child televiewers are informed about what a concentration camp is. And that's also quite a short fragment, but will not be able to show you. And it tells you, so there is this one observer, and he informs the 4 tankmen that it smells, you can smell the ashes of burned people. And then I try to quote, yes, "These are the girls, our girls of the uprising." And that's about the information you get. It's interesting. So here you have the uprising. It wasn't there in Warsaw. The Warsaw Uprising could not be mentioned when we were in Warsaw because it was too close of a connection. But here it could, and it shows you that inconsistency is one of the key elements of the series. But so the children do connect the women they saw before that were in the first fragment I wanted to show with the kind of people that were burned in the concentration camp. Okay. And now there is then a third fragment I wanted to show you, and that goes back to the concentration camp. It's a fragment of about 15 seconds, where you have these Polish liberators helping the prisoners to get into vehicles to be helped, and then one of the tankmen smashes his hand between the doors, just to show you that this is a comedy for children. I mean, it's not all very seriously presented. And now, these 3 little fragments, in total, I think it would have been about 2 minutes. That's all the historical information you receive about the concentration camp. And the rest of the episode is filled with something else. What happens is that the Germans come back, okay? The camp was liberated by the Poles, and now our 4 tankmen, our big heroes, need to make sure that it keeps liberated for the Germans. And I now had a really longer fragment then, a key scene to show you how this was presented in the series. You have one tankman. It's a tankman who also speaks German. And he is there together with a woman, a Polish woman. She used to be a forced laborer, but she was liberated by the Poles. And now she helps our heroes to orient themselves in Germany. And they find themselves in the house of a German officer. The German officer was captivated and taken away, but his German weapons are still there. And then the Germans come back. And so there are a lot of Germans coming to the house, and you only have these 2 people in the house. And our hero takes a rope, and he attaches all the German machine guns next to each other, and then in his macho way pulls, and all the machine guns go off, and the Germans are frightened. And so in this way, he is able to outsmart a big group of Germans, and then he puts on the uniform of the German officer that was left. He sits into this really beautiful German car, and then he drove off, and so the German soldiers outside who were still there think he is the German, and he salutes and he gets away from it. And that's a kind of a crucial scene in how this tankman, or this one tankman, outsmarts the Germans and make sure that the camp stays liberated. Okay, why all of this is important? What I wanted to tell you is that the main thing is not the historical context. The main thing is this adventure. This adventure is these little tricks that are done by the tankmans. In a way, you can compare it with a Zorro, a Western. And this was also what was mentioned by a Polish journalist when the series came out. Finally, now, we have our Polish Zorro. You have this men who are civilizing the West, taking all the road from Siberia to Berlin, and they bring, by sacrificing themselves, they bring justice to their people. When the series was made in the middle of the 1960s, it was the first time this kind of child series were made in Poland. One started to broadcast child programs at the end of the 50s, and then one imported series from abroad, like Zorro and Willem Tell and so on. And what you here see is that these art directors, that they had been able to use the conventions and the codes of these Western genres and to transpose them to a product that could meet the propaganda requirements of the regime. And so the new insight I want to bring in my paper is that we should think differently about propaganda in a way. In this specific series, the aims and the techniques of propaganda and of Western genres, codes and conventions do actually merge into each other. And that is why this was not so different for Polish children to consume as for an average American child to consume a Western. You just have like the cowboys there doing their tricky things and being very funny and courageous. And the history just serves as a kind of backdrop against which the action can take place. But the historical context is not without meaning. The fact that it's only at the back doesn't mean it doesn't have any sense. It's there, and it's noticed, or it's even not noticed, but it's taken with, even unconsciously, children do receive information about the way they are to be, they are to think about Polish history and the kind of values it stands for. That's the main thing I wanted to tell you today. At the end, I have one other hypothesis. I haven't been able to work out it properly, but anyway, I think among the crew who made the series, there were Jews as well. So in interwar Poland, film industry was dominated actually by people of Jewish descent. And you do see continuities after the Second World War that really famous filmmakers, we now think of Kieślowski or Alexander Ford, they were of Jewish descent. And this was such a mass production. It was so important. So many people were involved by it. And the people who were involved were exactly from these kind of age cohorts that could have either played a role in interwar Jewish film industry, or have been rescued as like children of the Holocaust, so ended up at the Aryan side, and in this way have survived the Holocaust. That in a way, I do think among the crew making the movie, there were Jews, but it's very difficult to trace it back because I started to read these biographies of these people, but they all glorify the kind of like artistic things they did in life, but they don't really always focus so concentrated on what happened during the Second World War. So it's something to be continued. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this presentation, and maybe we find some minutes afterwards, so maybe we could have a look on that spot if it works, because I think everyone is rather interested in to see what you told us. So the next speaker is Robbie van Eetvelde. He holds a master in history from the Ghent University in Belgium, and between 2009 and 2012 he did his study at the Department of Politics, History and International Relations at Loughborough University in the United Kingdom, where he started to work, as far as I got it. He started to work on his PhD on the topic of one country, two policies, the Gestapo in occupied Belgium. Some of you may know him from his stay at the Wiesenthal Institute some time ago as a fellow of the Wiesenthal Institute. Just let me mention one of his publications. I try my best French, but I beg your pardon if it's not correct. La police allemande dans la vie de Lescaut, l'activité de la Gestapo à Anvers, und aus dem Jahr 2013. And please, would you present now your lecture on patriotic versus Jewish victimhood, the reception and representation of the Holocaust in television series in Belgium?
Thank you for that introduction. Feel it. Where to put it? Screen. Slideshow. Okay, so thank you for that introduction. And I'll start the paper by knocking in somewhat of an open door. Belgium today is still ill of its wartime past. Let me just give you a very recent example on how this is still true today. A couple of months ago, a minister of the Flemish Nationalist Party in the new center-right government found himself surrounded by controversy when it was discovered he had attended in 2001 a meeting of former Flemish collaborators who had fought on the Eastern Front. Challenged by this in an interview, he said he condemned collaboration during the Second World War, but also accepted that individual collaborators had their reasons for collaborating. By saying this, he of course referenced the dominant narrative in right-wing circles of collaborators as idealistic fighters for Flemish emancipation in the Francophone Belgian nation-state. Belgium is ill of its wartime past, not only because of the wartime circumstances, which included accommodation to the Germans, collaboration with the Germans, and resistance against the Germans, but also, and perhaps most important, because of the upheavals in the immediate post-war period, which is the so-called royal question, the question whether the pre-war king Leopold III, who had negotiated with the Germans, could return to the throne. This brought Belgium to the brink of civil war. Eventually, the end result to resolve this crisis, and which is so often the case in Belgium, was a double narrative, in which part of Flemish civil society, found on the center-right, sympathized and identified with collaborators who were supposedly overly harsh punished by post-war Belgian courts. French-speaking Wallonia, on the other hand, followed the example of their southern neighbors, France, and reinvented themselves as a nation consisting solely of resistors. The result of the war and the post-war crisis also meant a taboo on discussing anything which had to do with the Second World War. In Flanders, this taboo was partly broken, in 1965, when Flemish public broadcasting, commemorating the 25th anniversary of the German invasion and following the Dutch example, produced a documentary television series which was meant to dig out parts of the dramatic past. It was researched and presented by a single journalist, Maurice de Wilde, of who you can see a picture here. And the program was broadcasted completely live, usually the journalist talking to the camera, once in a while intermingled with pre-recorded interviews. It reached extremely high ratings and became a cult TV show for which people actually intently stayed home to watch it. The conspiracy of silence, however, still remained in one subject area, which was the persecution of the Jews of Belgium. Lifting that one required an external influence, namely the broadcasting of the television series Holocaust in 1978. This broadcast ignited public attention, which culminated during the last decade of the 1990s with the popularization of Hollywood dramatizations such as Schindler's List, The Pianist, etc., but also ignited academic interest. And as you can see from that list, academic works on the persecution of the Jews in Belgium grew after 1978. The questions I want to address in this paper is how these two memorializations of the occupation, on the one hand, a national one with a focus on patriotic suffering, on the other hand, an international one imported with a focus on the suffering of the Jews, whether or not they come together in televised dramatizations of the Second World War in Flemish television series. And for this, I selected to look at 3 series broadcasted at different time periods. The first one, which is Secret Army, first broadcast in 1977, which coincided with the popularity of the documentaries by Maurice de Wilde and the television series Holocaust. The second one, Lily and Marleen, first broadcast in 1994, which coincided with this popularity of foreign-produced Holocaust drama. And then the third one, The Smaak van de Keizer, first broadcast in 2008, which I use as a contemporary example. So let's start with Secret Army. Secret Army is the story of Albert, of who you can see a picture on the right, who is the proprietor of a local cafe in Brussels, which is visited by both local residents and German officers. In secret, he also runs an escape line, which is called Lifeline, whose task it is to guide shut down British pilots back to Britain. This is, by the way, based on a real existing escape line called Comet. Surprisingly, of the 3 series, Secret Army is the one giving most attention to the persecution of the Jews. Immediately in the first season, in the 3rd episode, John Curtis, an RAF pilot who was sent to occupied Belgium to assist the escape line, comes in contact with a Jewish family in hiding. He is also the one who shows most indignation about the persecution. His Belgian colleagues in the resistance unwilling to help out of fear of their own lives. And I'll show this in a video clip. If I can find it.
They could be picked up at any moment. This new series of Gestapo purges isn't going to let up.
Is there sound?
It's not a surprise tactic. It's not a whim. It's a simple, methodical, effective method of deporting an entire race. They can only transport so many at a time. That's why they go through this whole charade of coloured cars. Each change of colour brings a touch of hope to the Jews. But it doesn't mean anything. They are all going to go. Make no mistake about that. Will you take them?
No, I can't. The Clarence line looks after Jews. It has to cope in its own way. Lifeline is not in that business. It would put us all at risk.
They may die.
I know. There is nothing I can do about it. Please understand.
Don't you care?
No sound? Okay. No. I'll restart it.
You realize they could be picked up at any moment. This new series of Gestapo purges isn't going to let up. It's not a surprise tactic. It's not a whim. It's a simple, methodical, effective method of deporting an entire race. They can only transport so many at a time. That's why they go through this whole charade of coloured cars. Each change of colour brings a touch of hope to the Jews. But it doesn't mean anything. They are all going to go. Make no mistake about that. Will you take them?
No, I can't. The Clarence line looks after Jews. It has to cope in its own way. Lifeline is not in that business. It would put us all at risk.
They may die.
I know. And there is nothing I can do about it. Please, understand.
Don't you care?
Of course I care.
The episode eventually ends with Curtis, the English agent, recently in the possession of false ration cards, discovering he came too late and the family had already been deported. Apart from this dedicated episode, Secret Army gives the persecution of the Jews lackluster treatment at best. For example, in episode 11 of the second season, a British pilot is sheltered in an abandoned apartment out of which the previous Jewish inhabitants had been deported. Another element relating to the Holocaust is the way Secret Army represents the German perpetrators. The actual political infighting in military-occupied Belgium between Wehrmacht on the one hand and SS and Gestapo on the other is personified by two competing German officers fighting lifeline. The Wehrmacht is represented by military policeman Erwin Brandt, who you see on the left. He is shown as somewhat of a gentleman. The SS is represented by Gestapo agent Ludwig Kessler, who you see on the right, who is shown both in appearance and in ideological radicalism as a stereotypical Nazi. This division is only one example of how the series portrays the Wehrmacht as an inherently decent institution, unwillingly corrupted by Gestapo and SS, which is of course a myth which scholarly research and especially the Wehrmacht exhibition has debunked by now. And then I move to Lily and Marleen. Lily and Marleen was a series produced by the Flemish commercial television station in 1994 and set in Antwerp. Its origins is a comedic theater play, which the author had based on his own experiences during the war. Then later, it was adapted for television. The story is set in a working class area and centers around Rick, who you can see on the picture on the left, the owner of a building in which his sister Lisa runs a cafe. And then the story is how their friends, relatives, and acquaintances experience the war. The location of Antwerp is for the persecution of the Jews of high importance. Antwerp was not only the largest Flemish city, but also the city with the largest Jewish community, 40% of the country, and also the highest deportation rate of the country. 65% of the Jews of Antwerp were deported. Despite this, in the series, the Holocaust is treated either as a taboo or completely as a foreign occurrence. Even more, there are no Jewish characters in the series. During the second episode, a character is introduced which personifies both a generic deportee and the forced laborers in Germany. It's Stavros, who you can see on the picture on the left, which is a foreign-born Greek barber who managed to escape deportation and has to spend the remainder of the occupation in hiding on the attic. It is with him that Rick discusses the deportation of the Jews, although indirectly and somewhat as a taboo subject. And I think I can play it immediately from the PowerPoint. Or not. No.
Ik heb inderdaad wat cognac en wat genever kunnen kopen van een Joodse jongen die in een winkeltje had. Maar die is moeten gaan vluchten voor de... Ja, je weet wel, hè. Enfin, nou, om een like voor alle keer te maken. Er stond wel eens een tijd zo wat geruchten in de gazette over uitzeukingen en arrestaties en zo. En daarom zou ik u willen vragen of dat je hier, op een maserve, een paar van die flessen zou willen bewaren.
Standalone storyline dealing with the Holocaust does not even occur in Antwerp, but in Amsterdam, which is in season 2, episode 11, when a long-lost Dutch cousin of the family reappears after the liberation, claims to have been denounced for sheltering Jews, and was deported to Auschwitz. At the end of the episode, the cousin turns out to be the actual denouncer. With this storyline, the Holocaust is of course transformed from a Belgian into a foreign happening. The main focus of the series lies with the suffering of the Flemish population under the wartime circumstances, be it because of food rationing, the activities of Lisa's son in the resistance, the economic collaboration of Rick, the so-called horizontal collaboration of his daughter, which results in the latter's unwanted pregnancy, or the effects of the post-occupation German attacks with V-1 and V-2 rockets. The suspected collaboration of Rick and his daughter lead to attacks by an angry mob after the occupation ends, where both of them have to be rescued by false testimonies given by Stavros and other resistance fighters. And then I move now to my contemporary example, which is the Smaak van de Keizer. It was broadcast in 2008 by the Flemish Public Broadcasting Network. The story is set both during the war and in present-day Flanders. There are two storylines. One is a storyline in the past, which deals with Helena de Keizer, heir to a local alcohol distillery, and her love triangle with two admirers, George and Alfred, on the Flemish countryside. Whereas Helena, who you can see here, and her family have to learn to live under German occupation, George and Alfred find themselves stranded in a POW camp. In the present day, the story focuses on Helena's granddaughter, who you can see a picture of on the right, who tries to reconstruct the painful family past. Set in Limburg, the easternmost Flemish province, the series completely ignores the persecution of the Jews. Of course, you could argue it's Flemish rural countryside. Jewish presence here was minimal at best. There was, however, opportunity to address the question, because it was to Limburg where the German occupier deported hundreds of Jewish laborers before March 1941 for forced labor in the local mines there. Instead, the series' focus lies much more with the numerous reasons why Flemish individuals collaborated. And this usually centers around the figure of George. And usually relates to the experience of occupation during the First World War. When George and Alfred are greeted in the Belgian army camp, they are given a unilingual francophone speech by their commanding officer, which of course references to the myth of Flemish soldiers in the trenches during the First World War sent to their deaths by French-speaking officers. In the POW camp, George, who is given a privileged position, is explained the concept of Flamenpolitik by his German superior.
Was wollen Sie eigentlich damit sagen?
Wollen Sie, dass ich Ihnen eine Zeichnung dazu mache? Ich hatte eigentlich gedacht, dass Sie schneller von Begriff wären, Riekmans.
Ja, aber wanneer Sie sprechen über die große germanische Gedachte, was betekent das precies?
Was könnte ich schon damit meinen? Dass Art und Charakter der Menschen nicht durch Landesgrenzen bestimmt werden. Das meine ich.
Ja.
Dass ein Spanier und ein Portugiese doch mehr gemein haben als ein Spanier und ein Schwede.
Ja, ja. Aber was hat das mit uns zu tun?
Dass ein Flame und ein Deutscher doch zwei Äste vom selben Baum sind. Das will ich sagen. Ein Brudervolk, genauso wie die Holländer. Ihr seid unsere Feinde, aber ihr könntet auch Brüder im selben Reich sein. Unser Führer nennt das Flamenpolitik.
School.
Zum Wohl?
Zum School.
This concept of Flamenpolitik again references back to the First World War, when it was already used by the German occupier to ease the Germanic Flemish away from the as Latin perceived Belgian nation state. When George returns from the POW camp, he starts working for the distillery, economically collaborating with the Germans. For this, he is harshly punished by the post-war repression by the mob, a scene which is immediately followed by showing the vengeance by riffraff against horizontal collaboration, of which you see a picture here. And so I come to my conclusion. In the paper, I try to discern whether two influences about the remembrance of the Second World War in Belgium, a national one centered around patriotic suffering and an international one centered around Jewish suffering, whether they come closer in fictionalized drama. By looking at 3 different television series, the answer appears to be no. On the contrary, the persecution of the Jews gets less and less attention. The explanation lies in the context in and during which this patriotic sphere of victimhood, this national remembrance, came into being, which was the immediate post-occupation period and its political upheavals. This not only almost tore Belgium apart, but also cemented the victim role of both the Flemish and the Walloons. In this contrast, no room was left for the Jewish victims in Belgium. Of them, only 2% had held Belgian citizenship before the war, and of which it didn't really matter whether or not they were returning from the concentration or extermination camps. The fact that Flanders today is still busy with digesting its own painful past makes the persecution of the local Jews even more of a taboo subject. When discussed, it is either in a hushed tone or as a foreign occurrence, as we saw in Lily and Marleen, or not discussed at all, as in the Smaak van de Keizer. Secret Army stands out favorably compared to the latter two, but its status as a British co-production can explain this. The centennial of the invasion of the German army in 1914, this year, makes the emphasis on Flemish suffering in TV series under a German occupation even greater. Certain factors were already seen in the Smaak van de Keizer. This element makes a coming together of both spheres in the short term unlikely. Thank you.
So thanks to Robbie, and we're going to switch to German now for the next presentation by Lisa Schoss. She wrote her PhD on Juden im Film der DDR, Untersuchung eines widersprüchlichen Zusammenhangs an der Humboldt-Universität in Berlin. Sie ist Literatur- und Kulturwissenschaftlerin und ich möchte aus ihren Publikationen, weil es sehr naheliegend ist, wähle ich aus der Liste aus, erwähnen ein Jidenfilm im Fernsehen der DDR in einem Sammelband mit dem Titel Aus einem Land vor unserer Zeit, eine Lesereise durch die DDR-Geschichte aus 2012. Und ich nehme aber trotzdem erst den englischen Titel noch. Wir brauchen keine Nachhilfe. Representations of the Shoah in East German Film on the basis of the discussion of Die Bilder des Zeugen Schattmann from 1972.
Ja, vielen Dank für die Vorstellung. Ich möchte über eine Fernsehserie sprechen, die ich mir ausgewählt habe, weil ich denke, dass ich darin mein größeres Forschungsfeld exemplarisch machen kann. 1982 bat Peter Edel, der Autor des 1969 erschienenen Romans Die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman und darüber hinaus bekannt als Grafiker, Maler und Journalist, in einem freundschaftlichen Brief an den Leiter des Bereichs Dramatische Kunst im Fernsehen um Wiederaufführung der gleichnamigen Verfilmung. Das Fernsehen der DDR hatte den Roman zusammen mit der DEFA, den staatlichen Filmstudios, als Vierteiler realisiert. Im Mai 1972 wurde er erstmals gesendet. Die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman war die stark autobiografisch gefärbte Geschichte einer deutsch-jüdischen Familie im 20. Jahrhundert. Im Fokus stand das Schicksal Frank Schatmans, alter Ego von Edel, der als Jude und Kommunist Auschwitz überlebt hatte. Edels Brief geriet zum Appell. Er drückte zum einen die ernsthafte Besorgnis von jemandem aus, der sich vor dem Hintergrund seiner Erfahrung als Zeuge und Mahner verstand und der seine Angst vor dem, was Menschen einander antun können, in unermüdliche Aktivität umsetzte. Edel zeigte sich erschrocken angesichts einer heranwachsenden Generation, bei der das Wissen um die Judenverfolgung, Zitat, äußerst mangelhaft erscheint, weswegen dann auch vieles wieder gefährlich hochkommt, Zitat Ende. Zum anderen zeugte der Brief vom Engagement für die Sache. Denn Edel, zeitlebens loyaler und bekennender DDR-Bürger, erinnerte daran, dass, Zitat, unser Fernsehen selbst viel geschaffen hat, um diesem Umstand Abhilfe zu leisten. Man überlasse oft allzu viel der anderen Seite, die sich damit brüste, als wahre antifaschistische Demokraten und Humanisten zu gelten und die das zuweilen sehr gescheit, schlau und in mancher hoher künstlerischer Qualität mache. Zitat Ende. Edels Appell hatte offensichtlich Erfolg. Wenige Monate später, im November 1982, wiederholte das Fernsehen die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman zum 3. Mal. Es hatte bereits 1975 und 1979 Wiederausstrahlung gegeben. Der Zeitpunkt dieser Wiederausstrahlung 1982 war, wie Edel bereits andeutete, von Bedeutung. 3 Jahre zuvor hatte das westdeutsche Fernsehen Holocaust gezeigt. Das war nicht zuletzt ein politischer Vorgang für die DDR. Das ostdeutsche Fernsehen übernahm die US-amerikanische Serie bewusst nicht, obwohl DDR-Bürger die Serie natürlich via Westfernsehen sehen konnten. Man sah sich aber in Zugzwang und setzte stattdessen alle eigenen Produktionen ins Programm, die sich mit NS-Geschichte, Widerstand, Antisemitismus und der Judenverfolgung beschäftigten, die sogenannten Antifaschismusfilme. Mit dieser Antifaschismus-Schau wollte die Kulturpolitik der DDR vorführen, dass man Nachhilfe in Sachen sogenannter Vergangenheitsbewältigung nicht nötig hatte. Nicht von amerikanischer Seite und schon gar nicht von westdeutscher. Denn nicht nur war Antifaschismus der historische Sinnstiftungsmythos der DDR, er war ohne Zweifel auch ein thematischer Lebensnerv der ostdeutschen Kino- und Fernsehproduktion. Und meine nachfolgende Rednerin wird auf ein weiteres Beispiel eingehen. Intern fiel die Bilanz dieses proklamierten Antifaschismus allerdings etwas differenzierter aus. Vielen Verantwortlichen, Intellektuellen und Künstlern der DDR, siehe Edel, dämmerte spätestens in den 1980er Jahren, dass die antifaschistische Erziehung, für die die DDR sich rühmte, in eine Sackgasse geraten war. Nur durfte das natürlich öffentlich nicht diskutiert werden. Zugleich war mit Beginn der 1980er Jahre eine neue Dynamik zu beobachten. Die Kulturpolitik förderte und unterstützte alle Anstrengungen, die im Zusammenhang mit Juden, jüdischen Themen oder dem Gedenken an die Judenverfolgung standen. Holocaust war mitnichten der alleinige Anlass. Die Gründe dieses Wandels waren vielschichtig und sie an dieser Stelle zu beleuchten, würde den Rahmen dieses Vortrags sprengen. Aber Holocaust war mit Sicherheit Teil dieser Dynamik, die West- wie Ostdeutschland betraf. Diesem Bemühen scheint zu widersprechen, dass die Wiederausstrahlung von Die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman 1982 in Zusammenhang mit einem weiteren Ereignis gesetzt wurde. Während die DDR-Regierung versuchte, sich in puncto Aufarbeitung deutscher Geschichte, Pflege des sogenannten deutsch-jüdischen Erbes oder der besseren Beziehung zu den verbliebenen jüdischen Gemeinden zu profilieren, pflegte sie gleichzeitig ihre seit den 1950er Jahren dezidiert israelkritische, häufig obsessiv antizionistische Rhetorik, die während des Libanonkrieges ihren letzten Höhepunkt erreichte. Es gehört zu den auffälligsten Motiven der anti-israelischen Propaganda der DDR, Israels Kriegsführung mit den Verbrechen während des Nationalsozialismus zu vergleichen. Ein Großteil der historischen Forschung ist sich einig, dass der Antizionismus der DDR systemorientierter Parteinahme und realpolitischen Interessen entsprang. Gleichwohl ist es unter anderem dieses starke rhetorische Mittel, das als Form der Schuldabwehr, der Täter-Opfer-Umkehr die Grenzen zum Antisemitismus überschritt, wie unter anderem Thomas Haury dargelegt hat. Doch möchte ich es hier nur bei der Feststellung belassen, dass Edel selbst seinen Film in diesen Zusammenhang gestellt wissen wollte und in seinem Brief auf jene Dimensionen aufmerksam machte. Denkt man etwa an Albert Norden, den ostdeutschen Chefpropagandisten, Hermann Axen, Architekt der Außenpolitik, oder Friedrich Karl Kaul, den sogenannten Staranwalt der DDR, kommt man zu der auf den ersten Blick irritierenden Beobachtung, dass jüdische Kommunisten an der Ausformulierung und Verbreitung des offiziellen Israelbildes oder besser Zerrbildes in der DDR maßgeblichen Anteil hatten. In einer zur Wiederaufführung veröffentlichten Ansprache Edels an seine Leser, Hörer und Zuschauer führte er dann aus, wie die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman den, Zitat, Blick für aktuelle Parallelen schärfe. Als ehemaliger Träger jenes Sterns und eines per Gesetz verordneten Vornamens Israel fühle er sich verpflichtet, jenem Wahnsinn zu verurteilen, der nun unterm gleichen Zeichen und unterm gleichen Namen andere Menschen vergiftete. Zitat Ende. Schließlich ließ er sich sogar zu Vergleichen zwischen, und ich zitiere erneut, der Endlösung und dem israelischen Angriffskrieg im Libanon hinreißen. Edels Standpunkt mag sich aus seiner Biografie erklären. Als ein Opfer von extremer Gewalt verurteilte er jede Form von Krieg und gewaltsamer Unterdrückung von Minderheiten. Dieser persönliche Standpunkt war aber auch ideologisch brauchbar, weil die DDR damit ihre außenpolitische Position und Interessen von einem Juden öffentlich autorisieren lassen konnte. Hiermit sind bereits 2 Punkte angesprochen, mit denen die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman exemplarisch die Auseinandersetzung mit deutscher Geschichte in der DDR beleuchtet. Also das sich messen lassen in Sachen Bewältigung der Vergangenheit und die Instrumentalisierung der Judenverfolgung und Juden für ideologisch gefärbte Tagespolitik. Beides Punkte, die im Endeffekt darauf zielen, die DDR als wahren antifaschistischen Staat aufzuwerten und zu legitimieren. Denn in gewisser Weise verstand sich die DDR nicht nur in politischer Konkurrenz zur Bundesrepublik, sondern auch zu Israel. In der DDR hatte man die gesellschaftlichen und ideellen Wurzeln von Judenhass und Rassismus insgesamt beseitigt. Konsequenter Antiimperialismus galt als einziger richtiger Weg. Ergo war die DDR bzw. die sozialistischen Staaten die beste aller möglichen Welten. Doch können Ideologie und Propaganda einen Film wie die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman hinlänglich klären? Oder gibt es darüber hinaus interessante Aspekte, die möglicherweise zu weiterführenden Reflexionen anregen können? Nach 1989 ist meist das ideologische, das instrumentelle Moment hervorgehoben worden, wenn die Sprache darauf kam, welche Art der Auseinandersetzung es in der DDR mit der Shoah gegeben hat. Dieses Urteil traf auch den Film der DDR, der immerhin mehr als 50 Kino- und Fernsehproduktionen zu sogenannten jüdischen Themen hervorbrachte. Nur würde man meines Erachtens nicht nur den Filmemachern Unrecht tun, wenn man hier von ausschließlich verordneten Bildern spräche, sondern auch den unberechenbaren Rest übersehen, der jeder Kunst eigen ist. Ich möchte trotz Kürze der Zeit versuchen zu zeigen, dass es ein Spannungsfeld zwischen beiden Polen gegeben hat. Ich formuliere es jetzt ein wenig schlagwortartig, einem Antifaschismus ex officio und einem Antifaschismus ex animo. Und dass Filme einen Eigensinn vorführen bzw. entwickeln konnten, der nicht oder wenig diskutierten Themen einen Raum gab, wenngleich freilich begrenzt, ja, dass sogar widerständige Aussagen möglich waren. Das führt mich zu meinem Beispiel. Die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman besteht aus 4 Folgen mit einer Gesamtlänge von 5,5 Stunden. Rahmenhandlung ist der 1963 von der DDR initiierte Schauprozess gegen den bereits erwähnten Hans-Maria Globke, Mitverfasser der Nürnberger Gesetze, jetzt Sekretär in Adenauers Regierung und als Eichmann in Bonn Lieblingsfeind der ostdeutschen Propaganda. Der Prozess sollte nachholen, was, so sah es zumindest die DDR-Propaganda, der Eichmann-Prozess in Jerusalem nicht zur Sprache gebracht hatte. Die narzisstische Vergangenheit der westdeutschen Elite und damit den Geist, der die Bundesrepublik bestimmte. Frank Schatman ist als Opfer der Nürnberger Gesetze als Zeuge geladen. Ein erneuter Anlass, sich zu erinnern. Erzähltechnisches Mittel sind Rückblenden in die 1930er und 1940er Jahre, die Schatmans Schicksal, Stationen seines Weges beschreiben. Hier lässt sich bereits erahnen, Ein Teil der Erzählstränge legt eine unübersehbare, fast schon obligatorische Tendenz an den Tag. Dazu gehört, dass der bürgerliche Jude Schatman in einer Art Bildungsreise zum politischen Widerstand findet und zum Kommunisten wird. Er lernt von seinen kommunistischen Lehrern, Antisemitismus als Maskierung des Klassenkampfes zu begreifen und die Prioritäten entsprechend zu setzen. Nach seiner Befreiung aus dem Konzentrationslager arbeitet er an der neuen Welt mit und wird zum loyalen DDR-Bürger. Nicht zuletzt deshalb entscheidet er sich zu einer Aussage im Globke-Prozess, von dessen Richtigkeit er überzeugt ist. Mit Sorge schaut er auf die Entwicklung in Westdeutschland. Die sogenannte Wiedergutmachung, die die Bundesrepublik an die Überlebenden zahlt, eine Praxis, die die DDR Zeit ihres Bestehens ablehnte, verurteilt Schatman und andere jüdische Figuren im Film als Versuch Westdeutschlands, sich von Schuld freizukaufen. Mehr noch mit Blick auf Zahlungen an Israel als einen schmutzigen Handel auf Kosten der NS-Opfer und der Araber. Hingegen suggeriert der Film in Gestalt seiner Hauptfigur, dass mit Errichtung der sozialistischen Gesellschaft Auschwitz im Modell einer geglückten Geschichte aufgehoben sei. So hat es der Literaturwissenschaftler Norbert Otto Ecke in anderem Zusammenhang formuliert. Der Antifaschismus hat eine Heimat gefunden und ist erbracht. Die Vergangenheit damit in der DDR abgeschlossen. So viel zur Seite des Antifaschismus ex officio. Auf der anderen Seite zählt die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman zu einem der wenigen deutschen Filme, der einen jüdischen Protagonisten hat und aus dessen Perspektive auch erzählt wird. Ein Umstand, der vielleicht neben Edels Beratertätigkeit während der Dreharbeiten mit dazu beitrug, dass der Film sensibel mit seinen jüdischen Figuren umging, dass er versuchte, Klischees zu vermeiden und gleichzeitig Einblick in die Gefühlslagen seiner Figuren bot, sowohl was ihre Stimmung in den Jahren der Verfolgung betraf, als auch die Traumata, die die Überlebenden ihr Leben lang mit sich trugen. Dafür steht ganz außergewöhnlich die erste Folge mit dem Titel Der Freitagabend. Die Folge ist in mehrerlei Hinsicht interessant. Zum einen birgt sie eine Momentaufnahme deutsch-jüdischer Geschichte in Nuke, wenn das letzte Beisammensein einer Gruppe Berliner Juden 1942 geschildert wird. Die einst angesehenen Bürger sitzen um den abendlichen Tisch. Man diskutiert, wie es dazu kommen konnte, dass sie nun plötzlich nicht mehr als Deutsche gelten sollen, mehr noch einer beispiellosen Erniedrigung und Verachtung ausgesetzt sind. Darüber hinaus erzählen die Szenen von jüdischer Pluralität und gewissermaßen en passant von einem innerjüdischen Diskurs, wenn nämlich die verbürgerlichten deutschen Juden mit Dünkel auf das fromm-religiöse Judentum in Gestalt eines ostjüdischen Schreiners treffen. Er soll helfen, an dem Abend einen Schabbat zu improvisieren, eine Zeremonie, die die meisten der Anwesenden scheinbar lange nicht begangen haben, die nun aber plötzlich Trost spendet. Nebenbei bemerkt handelt es sich hier um eine der wenigen Darstellungen jüdischer Religiosität im DDR-Film. Dort waren Juden fast durchweg säkular, wie überhaupt religiöse Protagonisten im Allgemeinen kaum auftraten. Bevor ich gleich einen Ausschnitt zeige, möchte ich noch eine Ergänzung machen. Der Freitagabend macht in den Rückblenden, die Schatmans Erinnerungen darstellen, noch etwas anderes deutlich. Es ist Schatmans Beziehung zu diesen Figuren, seiner Familie und den Freunden, die sein Judesein für ihn bedeuten. Denn ansonsten weiß er wenig mit diesem Judesein anzufangen, empfindet es als Kontingent. Es sind also keine Äußerlichkeiten, keine religiösen oder kulturellen Traditionen des Judentums, die häufig im Film als Markierungen eingesetzt werden, um dem Zuschauer deutlich zu signalisieren, dass es sich bei einer Figur um einen Juden handelt. Die Art, wie Schatman sich an diese Menschen erinnert und wie diese Erinnerung filmisch umgesetzt wird, macht deutlich, was er verloren hat und warum die Vergangenheit für ihn eben nicht abschließend bewältigt werden kann, allen Proklamationen zum Trotz.
Komischer Kapitän bin ich. Kann ich als Letzter von Bord. Muss mittendrin aussteigen. Meine paar letzten Leutchen im Stich lassen.
Seid nicht traurig. Seid nicht traurig, Dr. Markus. Wir sind ja schon gewöhnt an das. Und es wird kommen, der Tag. Und es wird kommen, der Moment, wenn wir können abrechnen und sagen, ist schon genug. Es wird keiner, nicht einmal von den größten Verbrechern vergessen werden. Emes. Emes.
Ein großes Wort hast du gesprochen, Elias. Es wird nicht vergessen werden. Emes.
Eine große Ehre für mich, Dr. Markus.
Weil ich dir das Du anbiete.
Soll so sein, Dr. Markus, wenn du es so willst. Aber ich denke, wir sollten jetzt die Lichter zünden.
Einverstanden. Das heißt, wenn es noch nicht zu spät ist. Aber ich bin ja bei sowas kein Fachmann.
Ist spät. Ist versäumt der Anbruch der Dunkelheit. Aber man kann es noch machen. Bei solchen Umständen.
Die Sabbatleuchter stehen im Schrank. Sie wissen ja, du weißt ja wo. Na, zufrieden, Läuse? Wird nach oben zufrieden sein? Schaden kann's ja nicht, wie?
Wenn Sie möchten, bitte kommen zum Lichterbändchen. Sie sind doch hier orten die Frau des Hauses.
Lichterbändchen? Ich?
Wenn Sie möchten, bitte sehr.
יום השישי וחילו שמיים וכל צבון ויכל אלוהים במשבי מלאכתו.
Eigendynamik entwickelt auch die letzte Folge des Vierteilers. In die Vorladung verschwimmen Schattmanns arbeitsintensives Leben als Maler in der DDR und seine Rolle im Globke-Prozess mit dem Überlebenskampf in Auschwitz. Als einer der wenigen deutschen Filme nahmen die Bilder des Zeugen Schattmann die Zuschauer mit ins Vernichtungslager, sowohl in der Inszenierung des historischen Ortes als auch in die Gedenkstätte der 1970er Jahre. Es war das erste Mal, dass ein deutsches Filmteam am Originalschauplatz in der Gedenkstätte Auschwitz-Birkenau einen Spielfilm drehte. Es sind besonders diese Szenen in Auschwitz-Birkenau, die Rampe, die Duschen, die Selektion, die mörderischen Bedingungen, Bilder, die heute ikonografisch sind, die für sich sprechen. Sie demonstrieren die Spannung zwischen Ideologie und Erfahrung und machen jedwede ideologische Interpretation des Faschismus nichtig. Die Drastik und Schonungslosigkeit, mit der der Zuschauer konfrontiert wird, aber auch die dokumentarische Treue der historischen Auschwitz-Szenen sind beispiellos im DDR-Film. Ich zeige noch mal einen Ausschnitt.
Mal die Jutten vortreten. Aber schnell! Na, was ist das? Das ist was Besonderes, ganz was Feines ist das. Riff, reines Juttenfett ist das. Wäscht gut. Aufheben, aber schnell! Du taub was? Ach, ein feiner Herr. Mit einer feschen Frisur. Ach, das sind wohl alles lauter feine Herren da. Na, dann machen wir doch gleich einmal extra Bad. Mit einer scharfen Nachspülung, bevor der Filz von Keppen kommt. Ausziehen, aber schnell, aber schnell, aber schnell! Los, dir das hier! Da in der Grünen. Hier. Prost, Torwart! Die Arme runter! Hände runter! Die Hände runter! Hey! Steh! Arme runter, was aus, aber schnell, aber schnell, aber schnell! Zweierreihen angetreten, aber schnell, schnell!
Ich kann nicht mehr. Du musst. Wir werden schon zusammenbleiben.
Na, alles im Sauberen gebadet, ja? Na los, lausen wir ihn runter. Nummer tätowieren, aber schnell, aber schnell, aber schnell!
Am Ende noch ein paar Worte zur Rezeption. Die DDR-Presse blendete die Momente, von denen ich eben sprach, weitgehend aus, mit Ausnahme des Nachrichtenblatts der jüdischen Gemeinde. Dass es sich in allen 4 Folgen um die Darstellung eines jüdischen Schicksals handelte, verschwomm im hegemonialen Antifaschismusdiskurs. Die Rezensenten vereinnahmten die Shoah für die Errichtung eines sozialistischen Staates und reihten sie ein in eine diffuse Geschichte imperialistischer Unterdrückung. Ein singulärer Charakter wurde ihr nicht zuerkannt. Wirksamer Widerstand war allein durch die Kommunisten geleistet worden. Diese ideologische Leitlinie war, wie bereits erwähnt, in Edels Roman durchaus angelegt. Doch der dramaturgische Mittelpunkt des Films waren die Rückblenden in die 1930er und 1940er Jahre. In ihnen schilderte der Film jüdische Schicksale in bisher unbekannter Ausführlichkeit, erzählte von Antisemitismus, Ausgrenzung und Verfolgung der Juden, der Zwangsarbeit bei Siemens, von Haft und Folter bei der Gestapo, den Deportationen und der Situation in den Vernichtungslagern sowie schließlich der unvermeidlichen Konfrontation von Juden und Nichtjuden im Nachkriegsdeutschland. Die ideologisch-propagandistische Gegenwartsebene um den Globke-Prozess erschien im Vergleich geradezu blass. Die Zeitsprünge entwickelten ihre eigene Kraft und setzten einem geläufigen Muster des DDR-Films zu einem gewissen Grade Grenzen, nämlich die helle, schöne, sozialistische Gegenwart mittels der dunklen, schweren Vergangenheit zu erzählen. Nicht was die historischen Umstände, aber was die Emotionalität, die zwischenmenschliche, familiäre Wärme betraf. Die Bilder des Zeugen Schatman war eben doch an erster Stelle Edels Bilder der Erinnerung. Vielen Dank.
Ja, vielen Dank auch und auch für die eindrücklichen Ausschnitte. Ich denke, dass für die gemeinsame Diskussion doch auch immer ganz wichtigen Bildervorrat stiften. Und it's a pleasure to present to you now Tina Frühauf. She did her studies on musicology at the Folkwang University of Arts in Essen, and now she's an assistant professor at Columbia University. And she's published a lot on the history of music and especially focusing on Jewish and German tradition. Just to mention some of her publications. The Organ and Its Music in German Jewish Culture out of 2012. And she's the editor of an anthology of German Jewish organ music published in 2013. And she's going to present us today a lecture on that really fits to this environment here, I think. The Sounds of the Holocaust in Eastern Bloc, Oral Perspectives on Horst Seemanns Trilogy, Hotel Polan und seine Gäste.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited that I can speak here today as the only musicologist on any panel. And I'll bring probably a pretty unique perspective to you all because I kind of insert some film music sound analysis as well. But I keep it to a minimum because I know that the vast majority of you is in a different field. In her article, The GDR and Anti-Semitism, Gabriele Eckhardt comes to the conclusion that Horst Seemanns' television trilogy, Hotel Polan, is anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic. She roots her assertion in a comparison of the film with Jan Koplowitz's novel of 1979 titled Bohemia, My Destiny, which she wrongly claims inspired the film. She states that, I quote, "The film is not only offensive to Orthodox Jews because of cultural mistakes, such as allowing women to set foot in a Jewish graveyard, but also it maliciously makes use of anti-Semitic stereotypes." Indeed, the danger of stereotyping is always greater in film adaptations of novels than in novels themselves, which have more room to delve into subtle characterization. But that does not necessarily imply that the film is of anti-Semitic nature. In fact, Hotel Polan offers a wide range of Jewish characters and types, perhaps in order to avoid stereotyping. More so, the film likes its characters. I'm thus contesting Eckhardt's claims based on the creative process of the film, its overall conception, and its sonic world. Rather, I would like to propose that Hotel Polan occupies a unique space in GDR's reception of Jewish culture and the Shoah that relates multiple and disparate influences. One of them was the maker's need to respond to NBC's Holocaust. I specifically suggest understanding Hotel Polan in the context of Cold War politics competition instead of anti-Semitism. Let us start with a few preliminaries. When and how did Hotel Polan originate? In 1970, Jan Koplowitz published his autobiographic novella, The Fight for the Bohemia, based on a draft written in the 1930s. In the spring of 1974, Hans Müncheberg, a dramaturg at the Deutscher Fernsehfunk, heard of the novella, and a few months later, together with Jan Koplowitz and author Günter Rücker, undertook first steps toward a filmic adaptation of the narrative. At that time, Gerald Green and Herbert Brodkin had not even planned what would become NBC's miniseries Holocaust. Because of personnel changes, the Bohemia project did not progress as initially hoped. A positive decision for a miniseries finally came in the fall of 1974, but the first film director backed out due to another project. High production costs, combined with the fear that such series would not sell in West Germany and Eastern European countries, stalled the project. In the meantime, Koplowitz realized that the drafts for the TV series were material for a comprehensive novel, which he then published in 1979 as Bohemia, My Destiny. Just months before, in September 1978, GDR's Central Committee had become aware that NBC's Holocaust had been bought by West Germany and was to be aired in January 1979. The GDR, however, did not buy the series, as we just have heard from the previous speaker, arguing that East German film had been already treating anti-Semitism, Nazi criminality, and Jewish persecution and deportation to various degrees. In the fall of 1978 constitutes a turning point in GDR's complex relation to the Shoah. The 40th anniversary of Kristallnacht was an important affair. There were more events than before. Commemorations were public and organized, with an increasing presence of the state and Jewish guests from other socialist countries. With these events, a greater awareness of Judaism began in the GDR, a development that would reach its peak 10 years later in the memory spring of 1988. In the fall of 1978, Cold War tensions between the two Germanies eased as well. For example, East and West Germany negotiated the building of a motorway between Berlin and Hamburg. This agreement was a major breakthrough and economically beneficial for the GDR. But that aside, Cold War competitions between East and West continued in full force. Along these lines, if West Germany thematizes the Holocaust on TV with a US series, how could the GDR respond? The answer was clear, with Hotel Polan. Hans Müncheberg confirms that this film project was assured from then on because of the imminent challenge to the station by the American series. On January 22, 1979, the ARD channel broadcast Holocaust, just when, after another delay, the collaborating trio of Müncheberg, Koplowitz, Rücker were in the process of finalizing the script for Hotel Polan. Müncheberg comments on the creative process of the script after watching Holocaust. I have the original here, but I read it in English translation. While working through individual episodes, the historical development stages felt to us, the GDR artists dedicated to these subjects, far too aloof. All the more we try to understand the Jewish question as a pan-national one, reaching as far as the Middle East, and to present it accordingly. Certainly, given that Holocaust already aired, positively, but not without controversy, positively received in West Germany, there was pressure for creating a distinct cinematic response, but in line with GDR ideology. So what is the film about? Originally conceived in 4 segments, the final version of Hotel Polan is divided into 3 episodes, extending to over 5.5 hours of film. The first part, The Family, covers the years leading up to World War I. The Heir focuses on events following the war. And the last season covers the period beginning with the rise of Nazism to 1937. A short epilogue brings the events up to 1942. NBC's Holocaust, in contrast, begins in 1935 and leaps into the post-war period. Hotel Polan thus projects a much fuller picture of Jewish life during the years leading up to the Holocaust, but touches upon the Shoah only very briefly. While one could easily interpret this focus as ignorance or Shoah avoidance, it is important to keep in mind that the film is based on the somewhat fictionalized events in the life of Jan Koplowitz, who was one of the few members of his family to survive the Nazi era in exile. The TV series loosely follows the timeline of Koplowitz's experience as he wrote it. In short, the series details the history of a traditional Jewish family who owns the Bohemia Hotel in Bad Grenzbrunn, a known resort town during the Habsburg monarchy. In the first part of the story, the luxurious hotel is seen in its old-world splendor, basking in the ease of times gone by. There are first attempts to push the family out of town by those envious of their wealth. With the outbreak of the First World War, the family is challenged as their foreign guests face internment and displays integrity by protecting them at its own risk. In the second part, Jan Koplowitz's early life is dramatized and the rising power of the National Socialists. In the third segment, the family splits up ideologically and politically, as one member joins the communists and gives up the practice of Orthodox Judaism, and all face the specter of the Nazis and the fight to keep their hotel. Given its complex and long conception, Koplowitz's writings and the film have several discrepancies. For example, the film leaves out Esther Polan's resistance against the Nazis. In the novel, the heiress of the Bohemia tears down a picture of Hitler from the facade of her hotel and has to suffer horrible consequences, a scene not shown in the film. In the film, Esther's resistance can be seen in her refusal to be banished. A scene that depicts the suicide of a Jewish World War I veteran in response to the Nazi outlaw of the Reich Federation of Jewish Front Soldiers in 1936 conforms to the official East German claim that the Jews had been only passive victims during the Third Reich and had not shown resistance. At the end, the film suggests that those who emigrated and the communist son actually, are the only family members to survive the Shoah. While the latter could be easily read as a political statement that communism prevails, the film does not close with triumph, but with destruction, thus suggesting a different reading, that of the Jew as passive victim. I will show this scene shortly. Now to the film music. Under the directorship of Horst Seemann, Hotel Polan was filmed in the years 1980 and 1981. As he did for most of his films, Horst Seemann also composed the score and played the piano part in a film sequence as guest on the piano. Such double and even triple function is rare, but certainly helpful in the sense that Seemann was able to closely intertwine his cinematic and oral ideas. Indeed, Seemann used music as a dramatic and emotional element and as a means to depict Jewish life and the era. According to Müncheberg, Seemann was especially fascinated by ritual aspects of Judaism and Hasidism, while the authors of the script were focused on character development, a difference in approach that all drove them apart at the end. Be it as it may, Seemann's fascination with the Jewish religion, and particularly Hasidism, influenced the score. The film starts, however, with a juxtaposition of the Jewish and non-Jewish worlds of Bad Grenzbrunn, and music plays an integral part of it right from the beginning. Trying to capture his juxtaposition orally, while also setting the stage for the soundscape of the remainder of the film, Seemann imbues the opening sequence with three musical elements: band music, the Jewish bassist, and the leitmotif that continues to accompany the film throughout, and it's really throughout all episodes until the very end. Let me briefly comment on these three ideas. The first episode opens to the sounds of a Chor orchestra. Although considered a marginal phenomenon in music, spa orchestras play an important role in the cultural life of the health resorts and in the healing of the patients. Their origins lie in Bohemia. The diegetic score thus immediately sets the stage for the setting of the whole film in a Bohemian spa town, providing couleur locale, but without any link to its Jewish visitors. Seemann establishes this link quite quickly by presenting an extra referential idea, the Jewish bassist, whose function in the film resembles that of the fiddler in Fiddler on the Roof. The bass player is both a visual and oral motif related to Hasidic storytelling. It draws upon Isaac Leib Peretz's Yiddish folk tale titled Shema Yisroel oder der Bass. It had been translated into German multiple times, and it can be safely assumed that Seemann was quite familiar with it. Shema Yisrael, or the bass player, centers on Avremel, a kind of Jewish Parsifal. A seemingly otherworldly character, Avremel settles in a small Jewish town in Poland. When the bass player of the local band dies, he replaces him. Although an inspiring musician, his playing of the bass viol never fits into the ensemble. He continues on with its own melody after the band stops, making the audience laugh. One day, when he plays in the presence of the rabbi of Krakow, the heavens open, a choir of angels sings, a band of angels joins in, and Avremel's bass finally harmonizes with a tune that sways throughout the celestial sphere. He falls dead. As with other stories by Peretz, the bass player thematizes the character's development from a drab existence unto a realm beyond life. According to Ruth Wisse, the musician stands for the artist who points the community towards its unrealized ideals. As already evident in the title Shema Yisrael, or the bass, the tale mediates between heaven and earth, religion and culture, as if announcing its intention of transposing one into the other. This function can also be found in the film's opening sequence, where the figure of the bass player serves to mediate between the Jewish and non-Jewish realm, creating a counterpoint to the Western musical sounds of the Spa Orchestra. Though his presence is silent, you will see shortly. In what follows, the bass player returns several times. After his silent presence in the beginning, he is later heard playing solos and serving in a similar fashion as in the story, to mediate between the sacred and the profane. As an embodiment of the culture of death, he ultimately foreshadows the death of the Jewish community. As such, he might have romanticizing function, but clearly without any anti-Semitic undertone. The bass player belongs to the many oral and visual motifs that convey orthodoxy. Another example is the inclusion of singers of the Leipziger Synagogalchor, GDR's only choir that sang Jewish music in concert and occasionally in Jewish service. From its foundation in 1962, it has been a mixed choir consisting exclusively of non-Jews. For the filming in August 1980, 9 singers traveled to Krakow, but in order to conform to the Orthodox soundscape, Horst Seemann wanted to convey only the male voices sang, a very short example from Louis Lewandowski's Matauvu, but that setting is a cappella because accompaniment wouldn't be conforming to orthodoxy. So here are a few stills which are much more elaborate than the very brief presence of that choir in the film. And there's another still from this film. Seemann also included 2 of GDR's preeminent cantors of East Berlin, Abraham Rettich and Olian Ingster, who both appeared as rabbis in the film, singing snippets of Ashkenazic prayer melodies. In the course of the episodes, we hear Maus Zur, Kol Nidre, a Niggun, and several very brief snippets of prayers. The film's only leitmotif is the last of the 3rd musical components of the opening sequence. The leitmotif does not quote any pre-existing motif prevalent in Jewish culture. It is freely invented. A discursive, lyrical, post-romantic melody softly played by the strings in a major key. It evokes sentiments of yearning and nostalgia, an oral reminder of good old times. In the opening sequence, it serves to introduce the head of the Polan family. Throughout all episodes, it helps the viewer to focus on the privileged world of the Polans and appears in its original form, yet with altered instrumentation. For sure, the leitmotif of Hotel Polan could not be any different from Morten Gould's music for Holocaust. He composed a somber elegy that occupies very little sonic space throughout all the episodes. And now you are ready for your first clip to actually see these 3 components and actually hear them. There are no subtitles, which is great for those of you who don't speak German, so you can focus on the music. So really focus on the music, because especially the leitmotif, because to some of you, the idea of a long romantic, discursive melody may not mean much. So in the end, this is your chance to kind of soak this up.
Haben Sie eine Ahnung, Herr Pinczewski? Was war der Herr Polan heute so nervös?
Die Radomska wollen heute kommen.
Wer kommt,
der Rabbi? Oh ja. Erst kommen die Gabes vom Radomska Rock. Ob es auch wirklich koscher genug ist hier im Hotel.
Womit hat Herr Polan so viel Ehre eingehandelt?
Na, ich bitte Sie. Eine Küche wie die von Polan finden Sie von Buenos Aires bis Odessa nicht. Und das sag ich Ihnen, weil ich es weiß.
Siehst du?
Ja.
So, where are the sounds of the Holocaust? Well, they are not that obvious. After all, Hotel Polan is not as much about the Shoah as it is a response to the Shoah. While Morten Gould, in his score for Holocaust, relies on the notorious Horst Wessel song and the Hatikva, Seemann's score, besides synagogue music, includes different types of popular music that closely relates to the scenic context. The Jewish veterans' patriotism is heard through the Heimat song Im schönsten Wiesengrunde and Friedrich Silchers Ich hatte einen Kameraden, the traditional lament of the German armed forces. At the beginning of the third episode, we see and hear the Lina Singers, a Czech vocal group founded in 1963 in Prague, whose style leaned on scat singing and jazzy rhythms frequently associated with American music, particularly the repertoire of the Swingle Singers. Most importantly, the Shoah eradicated a musical culture that accompanied Jewish life, which is presented throughout the film. The Shoah is visually and orally most present at the very end. We hear the leitmotif 2 more times. Communist turned Peter Samuel Polan separates from his Zionist girlfriend, jumping from a train that could get him into Swiss exile. The leitmotif for the first and only time appears in a minor key, so it sounds darker, sadder, and so on. But it is fragmented and distorted, played by the low brass, resembling a funeral march. A dark foreboding of the destiny he could be facing, or of his mother's ultimate destiny. Given that Peter is the only one to survive, wouldn't we expect different music? To the sounds of the distorted leitmotif, the frame shifts to his mother, who bids farewell to the Bohemia. Barely able to separate from her establishment, Esther Polan curses her son's politics. Just then, the leitmotif stops. The epilogue, in black and white, depicts her destiny to a restatement of the leitmotif. This time, it sounds just like in the opening scene. While this could be heard as irony, Seemann applies what Theodor Adorno and Hans Eisler called dramaturgical counterpoint, that is, film music that does not merely reinforce the meaning of a frame, but creates opposition to what is being shown. Music interprets the image and thus gains sovereignty. In this context, the dramaturgical counterpoint serves to create distance or heightened emotion, such as shock. The image of a concentration camp, and the final extermination scene seem to assume that the viewer knows their meaning. And this is the clip that I want to show you that actually make audible both leitmotifs. Again, without subtitles for the learning experience.
Du sollst sein geharget, erschluggen, du Boy, du amieser Goy!
Deine Liebe hast du verraten. Meine Jugend gestohlen. Du Schuft, du Null. Du Schnarrer.
So you hear the leitmotif softly in the background, now it comes to the foreground.
Wann gehe ich über die Grenze? Morgen früh. Schön.
Wenn alles vorbei ist, das wird ein Großreine machen. Juraj. Juraj. Mein guter Juraj. Siehst du? Jetzt ist dein Kind so alt, wie du damals warst. Oh, Samuel. Oh, mein guter Samuel. Mit dir, das war die glücklichste Zeit. Und wenn alles vorbei ist, dann wird auch der Peter wieder heimkommen. Nach Hause. Was brauchst du dann noch deine Politik, mein Junge? Ach, verflucht soll sie sein. Kompott. Ja, Kompott und Konfitüre und Zucker. Ja, das ist immer wichtig. Vielleicht sollten wir uns wieder Hühner halten. Na ja, ja.
Hotel Polan aired almost 3 years after Holocaust in the winter of 1982. The series became highly successful. Still, the broadcast of the third part in West Germany caused protests accusing the film of anti-Semitic propaganda. No doubt, the third episode depicts anti-Semitism, but does this make a film anti-Semitic? And why would Sweden, Austria, and the Federal Republic buy and broadcast the series if it were anti-Semitic and served pro-communist instrumentalization? Let us turn for a moment to NBC's Holocaust. When it premiered in 1978, the series faced great criticism, if not outrage among certain groups and individuals in the US. Elie Wiesel called Holocaust untrue, offensive, and cheap, an insult to those who perished. Critics were disturbed by a good number of things. For example, the blatant trivialization of the final solution and the blurred distinction between fiction and reality. On the long list of accusations were also the sentimentalization and commercialization of the Shoah and the script's narrow definition of victims versus survivors. Hotel Polan could certainly be accused of the very same. Both series are rather conventional, both hit nerve endings. Critiquing them harshly out of context, we could go as far as stating that one glorifies the Shoah while the other one somewhat avoids it, but that would hardly hit the point. What differentiates them are ideological issues. NBC's Holocaust strengthens the Zionist viewpoint that Jews can fight and resist, but that weak and passive diaspora Jews usually do not. Hotel Polan could be understood in the sense that communists will prevail, while capitalists will not. Should this be read as anti-Semitism? For sure, there was no intention to produce anything like that. In opposite, during the time when Hotel Polan was filmed, American journalists visited the GDR in order to discuss how the state eliminated racial hatred and anti-Semitism. This visit took place during a time when anti-Semitism was again on the rise, visibly so through the vandalization of Jewish cemeteries during the 1970s. Though I should also mention that the GDR really imposed heavy punishment, for example, 5 years in prison for painting a swastika. Why would a self-declared anti-fascist country release an anti-Semitic film just after the détente, when the Cold War competition was in full force? In his study on the depiction of Jews in DEFA films, historian Frank Stern explains the accusation that the GDR has not dealt sufficiently with Jewish themes or anti-Semitism with the apologetic journalism of the Cold War era. Indeed, anti-communism and Cold War politics have left a trace in the understanding that the GDR never dealt with Jewish themes and perpetuated anti-Semitism. Reading Hotel Polan simply as GDR's attempts to legitimize anti-fascism and communism and to delegitimize Zionism and capitalism would reduce the series to a one-sided reading of political instrumentalization, when in fact Hotel Polan responds to a broad variety of impulses against the backdrop of the Cold War, to Jan Koplowitz and his experience of the Shoah, to NBC's Holocaust and its reception in West Germany, and to a new political climate that reflects GDR's expanding need to respond to Germany's shared dark past in light of its shrinking Jewish communities. Thank you.
You need a mic, Karl? So yeah, let's open the discussion.
Well, one of the judges of the Supreme Court in the United States, when he was asked about pornography, he said, when I see one, then I can tell you what is pornography. So I saw this film in the Austrian television, and I can say parts of it are plainly anti-Semitic. But I don't want to go so much into the film now because I can't show it. But what I want to tell you, Miss Fruoff, is the following. There's an American historian named Jeffrey Herf who wrote a book about two kinds of memories. And he confronts the West German memory of the National Socialism with the East German memory. Now, there are some parts of the memory which are forgotten. For instance, there was a German communist named Paul Merker who was put into jail. And it is forgotten also that a member of the political police, of the German political police in Auschwitz, who escaped to East Germany, to the GDR, and who was discovered by one of his relatives, and who told this to the police. The police observed him. Then he was called into the Stasi, and he was confronted with the problem. He had to maintain his false identity. And when, in the Frankfurt Auschwitz process, his extradition was asked from the GDR, the anti-fascistic GDR did not extradite him. So, I feel that the story about anti-fascistic GDR is very strained. That's my personal feeling.
Thank you so much. Actually, let me respond to Paul Merker. I don't think he's actually a forgotten man at all. There are many people in Germany who have written about it. I have written about him too. But the period that he fits in is an entirely different period that I talked about. So I don't quite see the relation. I mean, Paul Merker was really, he suffered heavily during the purges of 1952 and 1953. We are talking here 1980, late 1970s and 1980. The GDR was really at a different point then. It's interesting, actually, that you perceived anti-Semitism in this film. I've watched it several times. I didn't, but that's actually the challenge that we are facing when we watch and when we listen, that we have all different perceptions. The perception that I can rely on are perceptions really that were pertinent in the media at the time. And the film was nominated for several prizes. Actually, it won one prize. I believe in Venice it won a prize. And it played at a film festival in Hungary. So, you know, it really seems that this perception is a subjective one that we have to treat sensitively, respectfully, and carefully. And I'm happy to have a lengthy conversation on your perceptions, perhaps in a different framework, and you guide me to the scenes that you find problematic. So thank you for your comments.
More questions up there.
Raphael Rauch, München. Ich habe eine Frage eher allgemein zum Thema Juden und DDR. Davor jedoch eine Anmerkung zu Lisa Schoß. Ich weiß nicht, ob man Holocaust für die DDR nicht so stark gewichten sollte, weil meines Wissens wurde das 3. Programm in der DDR nicht so stark gesehen. Jedenfalls kenne ich Diskussionen in deutschen Rundfunkanstalten, die gesagt haben, wir müssen Holocaust im 1. wiederholen, damit es auch in der DDR sichtbar ist. 1979 gab es es ja nur im 3. Programm zu sehen und anscheinend war das nicht so gut von der Reichweite her in der DDR. Aber jetzt nun zu meiner Frage. Das DDR hat sich als laizistisch beziehungsweise sogar weitergehend als absolut säkular verstanden. Es gab nur sehr, sehr wenige Juden in der DDR. Es gab, glaube ich, eine koschere Metzgerei in Ostberlin, aber sonst fast kein jüdisches Leben. Christliches Leben sollte auch eliminiert werden. Warum dann überhaupt Juden zeigen? Das wäre so meine Frage an Lisa Schoß und Tina Frühauf und an Robbie. Because we got an idea of music now, I was really astonished about your scene showing the Nazi with Italian opera in background. So I wonder if you have double-checked which kind of opera this is, or maybe Tina Frühauf recognized the opera in Robbie's Nazi scene. Thanks.
Okay, Lisa vielleicht?
Ja, also zum Ersten zu Holocaust. Wie gesagt, 80% der DDR-Bürger waren in den 80er Jahren in der Lage, westdeutsches Fernsehen zu schauen. Auch die 3. Programme. Das Problem war in erster Linie ein ganz praktisches, und zwar gab es in der DDR Schichtarbeit und so wie Holocaust ausgestrahlt worden ist im westdeutschen Fernsehen, konnte halt ein Teil der DDR-Bürger es nicht gucken, weil die eine ganz andere Sehgewohnheiten hatten als das westdeutsche Publikum. Die sind früh ins Bett gegangen, weil sie nämlich Schicht gearbeitet haben. Und darum haben natürlich weniger DDR-Bürger die Folge gesehen als in Westdeutschland. Aber sie wurde eben gesehen und ich finde schon, dass man sie gewichten muss. Es zeigen auch die Zuschauerdiskussionen. Es gab auch DDR-Bürger, die hinterher, es gab ja im Anschluss von Holocaust diese Diskussion im westdeutschen Fernsehen und auch dort haben DDR-Bürger angerufen und haben teilgenommen. Aber nichtsdestotrotz behaupte ich ja auch gar nicht, dass man es so stark gewichten sollte wie in der Bundesrepublik. Es gab eben, mein Argument ist eher, es gab eben diesen Paradigmenwechsel, den es in der Bundesrepublik gegeben hat, gab es in der DDR nicht. Und die Frage ist, warum gab es diesen Paradigmenwechsel nicht? Unter anderem eben auch wäre zu fragen, dass es eben eine gewisse Zahl an Eigenproduktionen gegeben hat. Insofern DDR-Bürger halt, also die hatten auch eine andere Herangehensweise. Das zu Holocaust und was Juden in der DDR betraf, es gab wenig religiöses Judentum in der DDR. Judentum in der DDR ist anders verstanden worden als in der Bundesrepublik. Vom Selbstverständnis her als auch vom staatlichen Interesse, vom staatlichen Verständnis her. Also man kann nicht davon sprechen, man kann diese Zahl, dass es am Ende der DDR nur noch 200 Mitglieder in den jüdischen Gemeinden gegeben hat, nicht repräsentativ für die DDR betrachten. Es hat wesentlich mehr Juden gegeben. Es hat nur wenig bekennt religiöse Juden in der DDR gegeben, zumal die jüdischen Gemeinden in der DDR ein sehr striktes Verständnis von Judentum gehabt haben.
Bobby?
Yeah, thank you, but I unfortunately didn't look up what opera it was, because I took it as one of the many stereotypical references about German culture which is throughout the series. But perhaps someone else recognized the opera?
I didn't.
No.
Sorry.
Es entlastet uns sehr. Okay, Bela Raschke. Entschuldigung, yeah, sorry.
I wanted to make a comment really on Four Tankmen and a dog, and I'm really sorry that we were not able to watch the clips, because it would have brought back very affectionate childhood memories. In Hungary, it was also broadcast during the early 70s, if I remember correctly, and so I'm speaking about this from a Hungarian point of view, from the point of view of a slightly different context that such a series acquires, depending on, even though, of course, the Eastern Bloc was referred to as a bloc, but we all know that each country, of course, had its own cultural tradition in which such a program was watched. Now, you raised the question: why were they watching such a film? I think you asked. You sort of put this question, and one of the answers was that there was not much else to watch, especially in terms of TV series. And especially not, and that's the other point I want to make. What was largely available were Soviet films made in the Soviet Union. And so one thing that I wanted to say was that Four Tankmen and a Dog, even though you refer to it as a TV series that was made for children, actually, I can remember very well that everybody watched it, adults included, because, well, in the early 70s, television programs were very heavily dominated by Soviet-made movies, and that in itself was very refreshing to watch a series that was not a Soviet made series, and I also wanted to add that from the Hungarian point of view, it was also important not only that it was not Soviet made, but that it was Polish, because there has always been this tradition of Polish-Hungarian friendship, historically speaking. How that really works is another story, but that was a stereotype or a historical cliche that Hungarians and the Poles stuck together, and so that was an additional positive factor when audiences were watching for Tankmen and a Dog in Hungary. Thanks. I just wanted to comment.
May I add just one rather stupid question? But after asking the organizers if we can get 10 more minutes, is that okay? Would that be okay? Yeah, okay. My question was, where's the dog? Where's the dog in your report? Yeah, because this may be or could make something more clear about the genre of children's TV series. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so indeed it was a family show. So we do have sociological information. In the beginning of the 70s in Poland, they did a survey. So what is your favorite television program? And this survey was, of course, only done among adults. And then 70% of the Polish televiewers said, we like Four Tankmen and a Dog. So here you have, well, information about the fact that adults did watch it with their children. We are really speaking about the beginning of child series in the Eastern Bloc. It just started at the end of the 50s that, there was time made available for children on the screen. And then it was first, they didn't have production, so they were just buying things from Western Europe. And in Poland, this is one of the first. It starts in 1963. This is from 1965. It's one of the first ones who was launched. So, of course, it filled in a gap, not only in Poland, but also in other countries where not so much was available then. So it explains why there was this hunger for this series, but it doesn't explain why it stayed that popular all the way along, and why it stayed popular after the collapse of communism, and why nowadays Polish children are watching it. So in a way, I mean, there is a universal message in it. And what I wanted to say is this universal thing is the adventure, is the genre element of this, which came from the West and was in a way adapted to the series. That's what I wanted to say to you. And then about the dog, yes, indeed. So the dog is not in this fragment, but the whole thing about having a tank and a dog, the tank is a toy for many boys, and a dog is a favorite friend for children. And just imagine a dog in a tank, it's very difficult, but so and for people, but they try to film it all the time. And the dog was important because by the end of the 60s, again, there is information that all Polish children recognize the dog. They didn't say this is a Labrador. It wasn't Labrador, but I'm not good at dogs. But it isn't like the specific type of a dog. But they said it's Szarik. It's like I was brought up with Lassie in a way. So they referred to the series. And it's the first moment in Poland that you have this homogenization of culture through mass media. And this is what the communists liked very much. They didn't like the opera and the theater and the bourgeois culture, but they had the monopoly over state television and were able to proliferate a kind of mass media production that homogenized a version of the past. It was the splendid tool at hand to proliferate this propaganda, but they were also very aware of the fact that they needed to adjust to the demands of the public, and that you see very much in the way also in the censorship one was able to negotiate about the content to really bring in what the children liked. And because you're referring to the dog, actually, I was very surprised. This is not related to this Holocaust episode, but I'm also analyzing other episodes in some of my work. And at some point, there is a scene in which there is a flagrantly historical incorrect thing that is presented. And in order to make it digestible, they make up this scene with the dog playing and doing different tricks and so on. And on the censorship gathering, there is this vice minister of culture in Poland, just to mention that this was, considered to be a very important production. And he says the dog scene is absurd. And then other members of the censorship board say, but the dog is important for children. They really do identify with the dog and so on. Couldn't we leave it in? And then they have this debate, and it's actually written down in the report that they don't know what to do with the dog. And then they said, we need to ask the children. And they organized a pilot session in which they asked children to come in, to watch the dog, and to say whether they like the dog to be in and out. And in the end, it stayed in. And it shows you that children were made decision makers in propaganda, state communist television production in the late 1960s.
Great.
Yeah, I'm also coming to this series because I would say I disagree a little bit with your hypothesis that it's just the adventure element which makes it so popular. There must have been something which Lisa Schoos introduced, this ex officio and ex animo, that kind of the series is an ex officio representation of Polish history. And there must be something underpinned which is understandable in the Polish society, because the Polish society is very much aware of its own national history. So there must be a message in that which makes it popular, which I do not know exactly, but it must be like that. And so there's two questions coming out of that. First of all, how are the non-Jewish Polish contemporary history, how is it represented in the series? Like Katyn, like the Hitler-Stalin treaty, the miracle on the Vistula, and whatever happens in the Polish history where the Jews are not so much involved or are on the periphery. And the second question would be, also coming back to the Hungarian example, that Hungarian underground press was such a very weak and the democratic opposition almost inexistent, not rooted in the Hungarian society. But whenever Hungarian communists tried to reinterpret national history, they reacted very fiercely. So is there any reaction in the Polish underground press and the Polish Samizdat regarding this series in the 80s, in the late 70s?
Okay, thank you very much. So in a way, of course, especially the adults watching it with the children, there are so many like hints that adults do know that this cannot be true. But it's so obvious, and it's just so joked away in a way to make it happen. And it could be done because it was a children's series. It would never have been able to be done with an adult series, of course. But the whole thing of inconsistency and irony is made into like a key feature of the series. And thanks to this, I mean, Poles were happy to accept this kind of double meaning of the series just because they would like to be entertained. So it had this double meaning, and when you were growing up, more and more you were learned to understand more about it, and parents were also there to explain their children and so on, so that it was a kind of, in a way, not typical product of the Polish People's Republic. Other cultural products were similar in a way that it needed to be interpreted in like a layered way. That was how the society looked like, yes? And then, so other historical elements that are mentioned, one of it is, for instance, East Germany. This was a big problem. So at the end of the 1960s, you had the whole idea of German revisionism. And so in Poland, they made Germans into arch enemies. So, and how do you do that in a television production? You can do it when the characters, the German characters, are only described in a very superficial way. If it's just like the mass there, then it worked in a way to tell the story with this German arch enemies. But sometimes, for the sake of the storyline, one needed to highlight an individual German, and then it was always, for instance, an East German who was picked, because this was in a way easier to explain than a Western German. So a Western German could never be made to a kind of sympathetic person. So just to give you one example. And then I haven't checked the Samizdat press, I don't know, but there was a huge debate lately, like in I think around 2005 in the Polish press nowadays about the series. And this was about the falsified content. It actually lined up with the political landscape in Poland nowadays. You have two big parties, and one is really fighting with the history, and the other one is taking a more nuanced approach, I think. And so there was this one critic who said that this whole series was falsified and it could not be shown on television again. And then one even showed it on television, and afterwards one had like historians who were discussing and picking out all the historical inaccuracies so that the televiewers were learned how to watch the series properly. And then you have people in reaction to that do understand much of the more of the kind of societal process in which this product was made, and do accept that they actually enjoyed a product that was so falsified. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the time is running, but okay. Now, could we, is it a question or a command? Okay, please, come on.
Coming back to what Bela has mentioned, don't you think it's possible that there is a kind of a nationalistic text, namely that the liberators here in the series are Poles, basically. Even the Georgian is, as you said, is not a typical Soviet and has a Polish grandfather. So it's basically the Poles who are liberating everyone. So isn't it possible that it can be interpreted from that point of view? What do you think?
Perfectly, yeah, of course. That's the main thing about the fact that it also served that message. So
propaganda, but this is not communist propaganda, but national propaganda, which is very different.
Yeah, within a communist country, yes, and adapted to a Polish version. Yeah, of course, this was simplistic, but
so maybe one final statement from you all at the podium, and I think comparing our panel now to the panel of this morning, which dealt with documentaries, we now had to face this embedded story of the Holocaust within stories of everyday life, yeah, as far as I could see. And so my question is, do you think that for television to become something like the shared national memory, it was absolutely necessary to go back to a very, very specific way of storytelling by coming to the so-called common people, not telling any story about prefigured, so to say, heroes, but dealing with this everyday environment, everyday situation, as in most of the examples we saw today. Would you start, please? Or you can say anything.
I mean, I think that perhaps my example is the clearest example, because the story of Hotel Polan is the story of Jan Koplowitz in just in fiction, with fictional elements. So actually, you know, you mentioned the idea of real life experience. I mean, here we have it woven in through his kind of semi-autobiographical account that was set. So.
Thanks. Lisa, what do you think?
Well, die Bilder des Zeugen Schartmann is also autobiographical. So it's.
Do you see any possibility to generalize this hypothesis that television deals with this?
I think they create more. You know, I think that in the advertisement to Hotel Polan, it was mentioned that this is based on Jan Koplowitz's story. Creates empathy. I think that I'm not sure how Schattenmann fits into this, but here I can say it's a human story. It makes it not just some piece of fiction, but the viewer goes in, you know, with the idea of that this happened, and it creates empathy and bonding.
Okay. Then Robbie, maybe.
Well, it's a very interesting comment, I think, and I think that for the Flemish case, I think this focus on everyday life is something which comes because of otherwise it would be very difficult for a Flemish public to really identify with it and to build interesting narratives for television screens, because otherwise it would have been high-ranking figures and politics and Germans. So I think it's this necessity to transform it into television and to have a humorous or exciting stories. It's necessary to bring it to a more lower level.
Yeah, so the series is about heroes who do extreme things in order to bring justice to their homeland. So it's not so much about everyday life, but the heroes were heroes children could identify with. And this is what you see in the sources. So the children either wanted to be a tank man or fell in love with a tank man. And they reenacted the scenes on the courtyard, at home, in school, and so the sofa became the tank, and you have all the scenes that were like played, like reenacted from the scenes. And this is also how a certain vision of history came into children's plays in the 70s.
Well then, thanks for your presentation once more, and thanks for the discussion to you too. And coffee will be served in the entrance hall right now. And do we continue like it's written in the program at 4:30? Okay, so everyone got that? Then it's 4:45, right? See you then. Thank you.